Lieutenant Thomas Hart was born into an influential family. So, when World War II began and the United States sent its soldiers to defeat Hitler, Tom found himself assigned to headquarters. However, he was drawn to adventure, and when the opportunity arose to escort a captain to the regiment's location, he volunteered for the task. They were stopped at a checkpoint for document verification. Moments later, it turned out the checkpoint was manned by disguised Germans. They killed the captain, but Hart managed to escape. However, he didn't get far. He came under fire, his vehicle veered off the road, and the lieutenant found himself among the bodies of American soldiers. He was captured and interrogated for 3 days, during which he disclosed the location of fuel depots. Afterward, he was sent to a prisoner of war camp. On the way to the camp, the roofs of the train cars, marked to indicate prisoners, were covered in snow. American pilots, attacking a Nazi railway station, began firing, unaware they were targeting their own men. The soldiers and officers managed to leave the cars and form a pattern to signal the pilots not to fire. Once the shooting stopped, they were marched to the camp on foot. Upon arrival, the newcomers were shown what happens to those who try to escape. 3 Russian prisoners of war, allegedly caught during an escape attempt, were publicly hanged. The leader among the American prisoners was Colonel William McNamara, a career soldier who never gave up hope of returning to the front lines. The German officer in charge of the camp was Oberst Werner Visser. Upon learning that a lieutenant was among the new arrivals, the colonel summoned Hart to his barracks. After questioning him about his capture, McNamara realized that Hart had divulged classified information to the Germans. Such individuals were not welcome in the officer's barracks. Claiming there was no room available, McNamara sent Thomas to the enlisted soldiers' quarters. The colonel himself had endured captivity without revealing a word, proving his resilience. Recognizing his strength, the Germans sent him to the camp. In the barracks where Hart was placed, everything was run by Staff Sergeant Vic Bedford. Bedford secretly collaborated with the guards, which allowed him to obtain food, clothing, cigarettes, and other essentials. He welcomed Lieutenant Hart and even gifted him a new pair of shoes and socks. However, later, Bedford asked for Hart's watch in return, a gift from his father. In the barracks restroom, there was a hidden passage that Bedford used to sneak out at night to conduct his illicit dealings. Bedford was generally a man of complex character and often approached new arrivals with skepticism. When a group of African-American pilots arrived at the camp, he initially met them with reserved distance. Despite their rank as officers, Colonel McNamara assigned the newcomers to Bedford's barracks. Their names were Lincoln Scott and Lamar Archer, both lieutenants. McNamara, understanding the dynamics in the barracks, asked Hart to look after the 2 men, knowing he was more open-minded. This led to tension between Bedford and Hart. Not long after, during a game of football in the yard, a cart loaded with bread passed by. Bedford threw a loaf over to the Russian prisoners, who were starving. They scrambled for the bread, prompting Bedford to repeat the gesture. However, on Visser's orders, a guard shot at him. McNamara intervened to defend Bedford. Feeling emboldened, the colonel himself tossed a loaf to the Russians, and Visser ordered his men to hold fire. Shortly after, a search was conducted in Bedford's barracks. The guards had received information that someone was hiding a makeshift weapon, which was strictly forbidden. During the search, a sharpened metal rod was found on Lamar Archer's bunk. Archer was convinced Bedford had framed him, but no one listened. Archer was taken outside and executed. McNamara appealed to Visser's sense of justice, but the German officer remained indifferent to the individual fates of the prisoners. Instead, he became concerned about a radio transmitter that had been secretly assembled in the officer's barracks. Visser went to the barracks and destroyed the radio. Sometime later, during preparations for a New Year's performance in the camp's club, an aerial battle erupted overhead between American and German planes. The American pilot emerged victorious, and it turned out he was African American. When the German plane crashed and exploded, it set the club on fire. McNamara became worried that the Germans might take the building away from them. The club was critical to their survival, so he began looking for a reason to retain control of it. An opportunity arose soon after. One night, Bedford left the barracks and Lincoln Scott followed him. Moments later, Bedford was found dead and Scott was accused of murder. Despite a German guard witnessing Scott near the body, McNamara requested permission to hold a military trial. He argued that Scott, as an officer, could not be executed without due process. Visser agreed, intrigued by the prospect of observing a tribunal. Hart intervened in their discussion, insisting that Bedford's body remain untouched until the crime scene was examined. Impressed by Hart's determination, McNamara appointed him as Scott's defense attorney. However, everyone, including Hart, believed Scott was guilty and deserved to be punished. Despite this, Hart made efforts to defend him, and Scott insisted he was innocent. Colonel McNamara met with Hart to warn him about the potential consequences for all the prisoners. If Scott revealed that he and Bedford had left the barracks through a hidden passage in the restroom, it would endanger everyone. Similar hidden passages existed in the officers' barracks as well. Hart warned Scott to keep silent about the tunnel. Meanwhile, Visser subtly offered assistance to the inexperienced Hart, revealing that Bedford had been collaborating with the guards. Visser even gave Hart a book outlining the rules of military tribunals. At the next hearing, Hart used the book to demand McNamara's removal as judge, citing a conflict of interest. However, McNamara took Hart outside for a private conversation, after which Hart withdrew his objection. Later, McNamara visited Visser, who was growing increasingly anxious about Germany's impending defeat and his own grim prospects. In a drunken state, Visser left a disassembled pistol on the table in front of McNamara, inviting a duel like in the old westerns. McNamara briefly considered the idea but ultimately returned the weapon. At the next court session, Hart noticed that Bedford's hands had been smeared with a black substance. He theorized that the killer had dirtied their hands to impersonate Scott, who would not have needed to disguise himself in the dark. However, the prosecution countered that Scott could have dirtied his hands while sneaking out of the barracks. Scott reflected on his journey to the front lines, dreaming of serving his country and returning home with honor, only to face harsh realities. He shared how, upon returning home, he had encountered circumstances where his freedoms were limited in comparison to others. That night, Hart searched Bedford's hidden stash and found forged German documents along with a stash of money. It was clear that Bedford had been planning an escape with the help of the guards. During the trial, Hart called Visser as a witness, accusing him of conspiring with Bedford to frame Lieutenant Archer. Hart claimed that Visser ordered Bedford's murder when the sergeant made a mistake. Visser dismissed the accusations, pointing out that neither he nor the guards needed to kill a prisoner in secret and smear their face with soot. They could execute anyone publicly in broad daylight. With this line of defense falling apart, Hart was unable to sleep. During the night, he saw one of the soldiers leaving the barracks and followed him to the camp's club. Inside a storage room, Hart discovered a hidden hatch leading underground. The soldiers had been digging a tunnel to escape the camp, storing the displaced soil in the club's attic. This explained why McNamara was so determined to keep the building. Visser had warned that new prisoners would be arriving in a week, giving the escapees limited time to complete their plan. When Hart confronted McNamara about the tunnel, the colonel admitted that the trial was a diversion to protect the club. McNamara also confessed that he had killed Bedford. The sergeant knew too much and had betrayed them by revealing the existence of the radio to the Germans. McNamara used the trial as a cover to buy time for the escape plan, sacrificing Scott's life to save 35 prisoners. When the final court session began, McNamara feigned illness and stayed in his quarters. In the courtroom, Visser and other German officers were present, unaware of the escape plan. Hart, however, realized the trial was a ruse to protect the escape operation and warned Scott that his life was being sacrificed for the greater good. Scott listened calmly and said he was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. To him, saving over 30 prisoners was a noble cause. He was also realistic about his own chances. Even if he escaped with McNamara's group, he knew he wouldn't survive long in Germany. Disguising himself in a German uniform would never work. Moved by Scott's words, Hart decided to take drastic action. During his closing argument, he confessed to Bedford's murder. This act shifted the blame away from Scott and protected McNamara's secret. As Hart delivered his speech, McNamara and his group used the tunnel to begin their escape. McNamara lingered briefly near the courtroom to listen to Hart's defense. Meanwhile, Visser ordered Hart's execution, and all the prisoners were gathered in the yard. It was then that the Germans discovered 35 prisoners had escaped. Furious, Visser suspected everyone involved in the trial was complicit and ordered them to be executed. However, just as the guards prepared to fire, McNamara appeared outside the camp gates. He confessed to orchestrating the escape and offered himself in exchange for the lives of the remaining prisoners. Visser accepted the deal and shot McNamara. The prisoners saluted their fallen commander. 3 months later, Germany surrendered. Lieutenant Thomas Hart and Lieutenant Lincoln Scott returned home. The sacrifices and courage of those who fought and endured in the camp were not forgotten. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more. See you next time.